Pets are often cherished as symbols of comfort, love, and unwavering companionship. But what happens when that bond is tested by nature itself? When the pet you trust the most is a wild predator driven by instincts that can overpower even years of trust? In the blink of an eye, a loving connection can turn into an unthinkable nightmare. Today, we're uncovering 4 of the most chilling stories of pets turning deadly. Let's dive into the first story. It was a warm, calm evening in the rolling hills of Ohio where a man named Sam Mazzola made his living from exotic animals. Sam's property, surrounded by dense woods, was home to various wild creatures: bears, tigers, wolves, all living in enclosures or roaming the grounds. To many, Sam was a controversial figure, revered by some for his expertise and loathed by others for his apparent disregard for animal welfare. Born and raised in Ohio, Sam's passion for animals began early. As a child, he developed an interest in collecting and caring for creatures, a hobby that gradually grew into a full-fledged obsession. Over time, Sam's fascination with exotic wildlife led him to accumulate a variety of dangerous animals. Sam's collection included lions, tigers, and bears, dangerous creatures that, despite their raw power, he believed could be tamed and cared for. He often exhibited them at fairs and public events, offering people a chance to get close to the animals. Sam justified his actions by claiming he was educating the public about conservation, but the truth was more complex. He faced numerous allegations of animal cruelty and neglect. The United States Department of Agriculture had cited him multiple times for violating the Animal Welfare Act, including failing to provide adequate veterinary care and proper living conditions. His license was revoked in 2009, and a fine of $21,000 was imposed for the violations. Yet Sam was allowed to continue housing his animals. Despite the controversies, Sam pressed on with his exhibitions. His most famous animal was Bart, a 500-pound black bear. Sam had raised Bart from a cub, and their bond was well known in the community. The bear would stand on its hind legs when Sam approached, eager for the routine feeding. The two seemed inseparable, and Sam often told visitors how much he trusted Bart, despite the whispers of danger surrounding such a powerful creature. But bonds like these can be fragile, especially when outsiders become involved. Brett Condra, a 24-year-old Ohioan, had long been fascinated by animals. His childhood was spent exploring creeks and rivers in northeastern Ohio, discovering fishing sports and learning to respect the wildlife around him. He would often spend his weekends camping and catching bullfrogs with blades of grass, always surrounded by nature. His family supported his love for animals, and by his 20s, Brent sought work that allowed him to stay close to his passion. When Sam offered him a job on his property, Brent ignored his father's warnings about Sam's business practices and the risks of working with wild animals. The opportunity felt like a dream come true, one he couldn't bring himself to resist. On August 19, 2010, Brent was preparing for the evening feeding when tragedy struck. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the property. With a bucket of raw meat in hand, Brent approached Bart's 15-foot by 20-foot enclosure. Over the years, Brent had grown confident in handling the animals, particularly Bart, who seemed to recognize him and had always been docile in his presence. As usual, the bear stood up on its hind legs, eagerly awaiting its meal. In the early days, Brent had been nervous around Bart, but over time he believed he had earned the bear's trust. He approached with calm and steady movements, respecting the animal's wild nature. Slowly, he unlocked the door to the enclosure and let Bart out. Feeding Bart outside his cage had become a routine, one the bear had grown accustomed to. Brent, confident in their bond, never imagined how quickly trust could shatter. Without warning, Bart lunged at Brent, grabbing him with powerful claws and slamming him to the ground. The 500-pound bear, normally calm, had transformed into a savage force. Brent had no time to react. Bart's claws raked across his body and its teeth sank into his face, tearing through flesh and bone. Brent struggled to break free, but the bear was too strong. Its claws shredded his chest and arms, while its powerful jaws crushed his hand and shattered his ribs. Blood pooled around him as Bart continued the brutal attack. Sam, who had been preparing other animals for the night, heard the commotion and rushed to the scene. He shouted at Bart, trying to distract the bear long enough to stop the attack. With a fire extinguisher in hand, Sam managed to force Bart back into the cage. But the damage was done. Brent lay bleeding on the ground, his body torn apart by the bear's assault. Sam immediately called 911 and Brent was rushed to Metro Health Medical Center. Despite all efforts, Brent died from his injuries shortly after 1:30 a.m. on August 20th, 2010. The coroner's report confirmed that Brent's cause of death was blunt and sharp force trauma consistent with a bear attack. Sam, in a brief interview, spoke carefully about the incident, declining to provide details, but mentioning that Brent had been Bart's favorite caretaker. He added that while he respected Brent's family's wishes, he believed Brent would not have wanted Bart euthanized. However, Brent's father and ex-wife insisted on the bear's euthanasia, and a veterinarian carried it out. The tragedy didn't end with Brent's death. In 2011, Sam Mazzola was found lifeless in his home, an eerie scene that only deepened the mystery surrounding his life. Sam's body was discovered handcuffed, face down on his waterbed, wearing a leather mask. The autopsy revealed asphyxiation with a bedroom toy lodged in his throat. The circumstances of his death remain unsolved, adding to the strange and unsettling nature of his legacy. After Sam's death, his exotic animals were relocated in the hope that they would finally find a safer life. Yet Sam's story is nothing compared to the next one. DC-20, a woman who believed she could tame a crocodile. But when a 17-foot, 1,300-pound beast isn't in a good mood, tragedy can strike, and this story is no exception. It was a hot, oppressive morning on the 10th of January 2019 when DC, a 44-year-old wildlife research scientist, arrived at the CV Yoshiki laboratory in Indonesia. The sun rose over the sprawling pearl farm, casting long shadows over the murky swamps where a collection of crocodiles basked lazily in the heat. The laboratory, situated within the farm, was home to a group of illegally kept crocodiles that spent their days sunbathing by the water. Among them was Mary, a 17-foot, 1,300-pound creature with a reputation that preceded her. Known for her ferocity and cunning, Mary had become a spectacle, her incredible size and strength drawing awe from those who observed her. DC had long been fascinated by the ancient reptiles, and as an animal lover, feeding them was a ritual she enjoyed. Her routine was predictable. She would arrive early, the first employee at the lab, bringing fresh cuts of meat for the crocodiles. Mary was always the first she fed, her powerful body often propelling herself out of the water to snatch the meat from mid-air with lightning speed. The crocodile was a marvel to DC, a testament to nature's raw power and efficiency. It was a graceful yet dangerous dance between them, the ritual repeated with reverence on both sides. That morning, DC approached the enclosure with a bucket of meat, her attention drawn to the crocodile's fluid movements, a constant reminder of its predatory nature. The sun cast a golden glow on Mary's scaly hide as it locked its beady eyes on the offering. DC carefully raised a chunk of meat over the 8-foot-tall wall. She had done this countless times, always careful, always mindful of the danger. But that day, in her awe, she let her guard down. With a sudden flick of its powerful tail, Mary surged upward, leaping toward the meat. DC's hand, which was too low, was within reach. The crocodile's teeth, razor-sharp and deadly, sank into her flesh with terrifying precision. DC screamed, the pain immediate and blinding. Mary, with blistering speed, yanked her over the wall and into the enclosure. The ground beneath DC cracked as she collided with the concrete floor. Pain exploded through her body, but before she could even react, Mary twisted her body with frightening precision, performing the death roll. DC's body was wrenched and tossed like a rag doll, bones cracking, blood spilling across the floor. Her screams were swallowed by the sound of crushing bone and tearing flesh. Mary's cold eyes never left her, unblinking and unyielding. DC's strength faded, her cries becoming weaker as the crocodile continued its brutal assault. Her left arm, the first to be torn away, disappeared down the creature's throat, swallowed whole. The crushing, twisting agony of the attack overwhelmed DC's senses. She was now bleeding profusely, struggling to stay conscious. As her body was lifted and slammed again, she realized she had no chance of escape. With a surge of desperation, she scrambled to her feet, searching for anything to help her flee. Her remaining arm was barely functional, but she pushed herself toward the enclosure wall, hoping for a crack or ledge to grip onto. The wall was smooth, the surface offering nothing. The momentary hope faded as her strength drained away. Without warning, DC slipped. She fell into the murky waters below, now fully immersed in Mary's domain. The water churned with blood as the crocodile moved in. Mary's movements were swift and deliberate as she entered the water. DC flailed her remaining arm, desperate to paddle toward safety. But the water was not her ally. This was Mary's world, and the crocodile was a master of it. With terrifying speed, Mary closed the distance, clamping her jaws around DC's torso. The crunch of her ribs breaking echoed through the water, and DC's screams rang out, a futile cry for help. The blood in the water was unmistakable. DC fought, her body convulsing as the crocodile dragged her deeper. Mary's grip tightened and the water began to fill DC's lungs. She could feel her life slipping away, the weight of the creature pulling her down, her vision blurring. Her mind screamed for air, for salvation, but there was none. The murky depths became her tomb. Horrified, the staff stood frozen as the crocodile emerged from the water, the mangled remains of their colleagues still held tightly in her jaws. The terror was palpable as they watched the creature drag the lifeless body onto the concrete floor, leaving a trail of blood behind. DC's left hand had been severed and her torso was barely recognizable. Panic set in as the staff hesitated to enter the enclosure. They called the authorities, Tomboriri police and officials from the North Sulawesi Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The rescue team arrived, but when they approached the crocodile, Mary reacted violently, thrashing her tail and hissing in warning. She was not ready to give up her kill. With caution, the team sedated Mary and transported her to a wildlife rescue facility, where it was confirmed she had consumed DC's body. Staff at the CV Yoshiki laboratory described DC as a quiet lady who loved animals. They were deeply devastated by the death of the head of the lab. However, they noted with concern how Mary had shown prior signs of aggression, having previously attacked and killed another crocodile that had ventured into her pool. The farm's owner, a Japanese national, was arrested for illegally keeping crocodiles and sentenced to 10 years for his reckless disregard that led to DC's death. Crocodiles are among the most dangerous creatures on Earth. In the decade leading up to 2023, over 1,000 attacks were recorded in Indonesia, with nearly 500 fatalities. However, the danger of keeping wild creatures was far from over. In Hampshire, England, Brandon's close bond with his reptiles, especially Tiny, his African rock python, would soon lead to an unexpected tragedy. What had once been a simple affection for his pets turned into a fatal misstep, leaving behind a mystery that may never be fully understood. It was a quiet evening in Hampshire, England, where Brandon had spent countless hours immersed in his passion for reptiles. His bedroom, tucked away in a corner of the house, was a sanctuary, a space where snakes and tarantulas lived in harmony, all under his expert care. He was a herpetologist, not just a casual enthusiast, and his collection of 10 snakes and 12 tarantulas was more than just a hobby, it was his life's work. From a young age, Brandon had been captivated by the fascinating world of reptiles. At 10, he was hooked on nature documentaries, mesmerized by the slithering movements of snakes and the silent predatory grace of tarantulas. By 15, he was holding his first snake in his hands, and from that point his collection and knowledge only grew. Among all of Brandon's animals, one stood out above the rest. Tiny, a 7.9-foot-long African rock python. She was an impressive creature, destined to grow even larger, with the potential to reach lengths of 13 feet or more. Tiny had been with him for years, and what began as a small, manageable pet had transformed into a massive, muscle-bound serpent, coiling with strength and power. Tiny was usually kept in a secure enclosure, a large reinforced glass tank designed to house her safely. However, Brandon often allowed her out to roam freely during feeding times or when he spent time handling her. Despite her size and strength, he treated Tiny like family, caring for her with the same devotion as he did for his other reptiles. In his eyes, Tiny was more than a pet, she was a companion, an integral part of his world. But as Tiny grew, so did the risks. A python's constriction isn't an act of aggression, it's a calculated move for survival, an instinct honed over millennia. Pythons only squeeze when they're preparing to strike, when they're ready to feed. But with Tiny's increasing size and strength, Brandon knew that handling her required more caution. No longer could he drape her casually around his shoulders or let her explore freely as he had when she was smaller. The risks of handling an 8-foot python were simply too great. Yet Brandon's love for the snake often clouded his judgment. On the day everything went wrong, he allowed Tiny to roam freely in his room, underestimating the danger in doing so. August 25, 2017 began like any other day. Brandon, a landscaper by trade, returned home after work eager to relax. He lived with his parents who were downstairs at the time. Brandon's usual routine was to head upstairs to change before returning downstairs to spend time with his reptiles. But this evening, something was different. Just after heading up to his bedroom, a sudden ominous thud echoed through the house. There was no cry of pain, no shout for help, just silence. Brandon's father, hearing the noise from the living room, grew concerned and went to investigate. When he opened the door to Brandon's room, the sight that greeted him was nothing short of horrifying. There, on the floor, was Brandon motionless, his body sprawled out on the floor in a way that was entirely unnatural. Tiny was nowhere to be found. Panic gripped his heart as he called for Brandon's mother to dial emergency services. They rushed upstairs, but their attempts to revive Brandon were futile. He remained unresponsive. 8 long minutes passed before the paramedics arrived, but it was too late. The 31-year-old man, once so full of life and enthusiasm for his reptiles, was dead. Tiny, for her part, had slithered off into a corner of the room, seemingly content, her behavior eerily calm in contrast to the chaos unfolding around her. The investigation into Brandon's death was swift, but the cause of his demise was unclear. The coroner's report indicated asphyxiation, but there were no marks on his body to suggest a violent struggle. There were no bruises or bite marks, nothing to indicate that Tiny had attacked him in the way many would expect from a predatory animal. Snake expert Professor Scott Boback offered a different perspective. According to him, constriction alone wasn't the most likely cause of death in this case. Instead, he suggested that Tiny's grip might have caused a sudden restriction of blood flow to Brandon's brain, triggering a cardiac arrest. The massive pressure from the python's coiling could have caused Brandon to lose consciousness in mere seconds, and without immediate intervention, his heart would have stopped, leading to his tragic death. Further examination of the scene revealed something curious. Despite the absence of bite marks or signs of a struggle, the experts couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong, something beyond just a simple accident. Veterinarian John Cooper, who had joined the investigation, took a closer look at Tiny's recently shed skin. There were no signs that Brandon had fought for his life, no frantic claw marks or scratches. Tiny's skin was intact, and there were no indications of struggle. This was an unsettling discovery, raising more questions than answers. Despite all the evidence pointing toward an accidental death, there remained a lingering suspicion that Tiny had somehow been responsible. Could it be that the python had been acting out of affection for her owner? Snakes, after all, aren't known for the same kind of attachment that a dog or a cat might display. Their interactions with humans are often driven by instinct, whether it's for warmth, security, or simply the comfort of being close to their handler. In Tiny's case, it was possible that the snake had wrapped herself around Brandon not out of aggression, but because she had felt a need for closeness. The gripping power of the python, combined with Brandon's inability to escape, might have turned into something deadly, even if it was never the snake's intention. Adding to the mystery was the discovery of a faint rib fracture on Brandon's body, likely caused by the python's powerful coils. This too suggested that Tiny's grip had been too much, that the strength of her coils had overwhelmed Brandon's body in a way that he couldn't escape. Months after the tragedy, Brandon's parents faced a difficult decision. Despite their grief, they couldn't bring themselves to put down the python. Tiny had been an integral part of their son's life, and they didn't see her as a vicious animal. However, her growing size and the weight of the tragedy led them to rehome her. Tiny was sent to the National Center for Reptile Welfare at Hadlow College in Tunbridge, Kent. The full truth of what happened in that bedroom remains shrouded in mystery, known only to Tiny. Yet nature's fury didn't end with Brandon. It would soon claim another victim in a completely different form, this time in the quiet streets of St. Louis. Dennis Moore, a beloved member of his community, would unknowingly walk into deadly danger. A savage attack by a pack of wild pit bulls would forever change the lives of those who knew him. It was a cold, crisp evening in the Penrose neighborhood of St. Louis, Missouri, the sun long gone and the city beginning to settle into the quiet of the night. Dennis Moore, a retired landscaper in his 60s, had just kissed his wife Melvina goodbye. She was off to her night shift at the nursing home, and he was preparing for his usual walk through the neighborhood. For years, this routine had been a constant in his life, a time for reflection and a break from the duties of the day. Dennis, in his simple jacket and cap, locked the door behind him and set out down the street. The world seemed to slow as he walked, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves and the muted sounds of the city blending into the background. It was during these walks that he found a kind of peace, a break from the chaos of the world, if only for a little while. The Penrose neighborhood, a tight-knit community, had always been a peaceful place. Neighbors knew one another by name, and help was always just a knock away. Dennis and Melvina had made their home here for years, and their lives had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dennis, always the Good Samaritan, tended to the lawns and gardens of his neighbors, helping the elderly and offering a friendly smile to everyone he met. It was a life of quiet satisfaction, one built on love and community. But as Dennis walked those familiar streets that evening, something was different. Unbeknownst to him, the streets of Penrose had become the hunting ground of a pack of dogs, wild and aggressive. Pit bulls, known for their strength and tenacity, had been roaming freely through the neighborhood for days, causing fear and unease among the residents. They had become a dangerous presence, unafraid of people, territorial, and relentless in their pursuit of prey. Over the past several days, neighbors had noticed the dogs jumping fences, barking loudly, and roaming in packs of 6, moving in tight formations like a wolf pack, driven by hunger and aggression. Dennis was nearing the end of his walk, just 2 blocks from his home, when the danger that had been lurking in the shadows finally found its target. His phone was dying, and he planned to text Melvina once he arrived home. But as he rounded the corner and approached his block, the sudden sound of growling broke the stillness of the night. From the darkness of the alleyway, a pack of pit bulls emerged, their eyes gleaming with ferocity. They surrounded Dennis, their bodies tense, teeth bared, and growls filling the air. He attempted to back away, but the dogs were too fast, too powerful. They closed in on him, and before he could react, they lunged. The attack was swift and brutal. Dennis, despite his strength, had no chance against the sheer power of the attack. The dogs tore into him, their massive jaws sinking into his flesh, dragging him to the ground. The force of the attack was overwhelming. One of the pit bulls bit into his leg while another latched onto his arm, pulling him toward the pack's center. His cries for help were swallowed by the night as the dogs consumed him alive, the pack's primal hunger unstoppable. As the hours passed, the neighborhood remained unaware of the tragedy unfolding just a few blocks away. It wasn't until a neighbor taking out the trash stumbled upon the gruesome scene that the authorities were alerted. A call was made and the police arrived quickly, finding Dennis's body already decaying from the vicious attack. The dogs had torn him apart, leaving nothing but the remnants of what had once been a man who had loved his family and his community. Melvina at work that night had grown increasingly worried when Dennis didn't call at his usual time. She tried reaching him several times, but her calls went unanswered. By 5 a.m., she knew something was terribly wrong. When the police finally rang, she picked up only to hear a voice she didn't recognize. The officer on the other end asked if she was Dennis Moore's wife. Her heart sank as she nodded, but the officer refused to explain over the phone. When she arrived home later that morning, her worst fears were confirmed. She was shown only her husband's head, the rest of his body too damaged to be seen. The trauma was unimaginable and the shock left her numb. The community, which had always felt like a safe haven, was now marred by the brutal death of a beloved resident. Dennis Moore, the kind-hearted man who had always been there for others, was gone, taken by the very animals that had been allowed to roam unchecked. The investigation into the attack revealed that the dogs responsible for the savage assault were part of a larger pack. 3 of the dogs had been captured, but the police believed there were still 3 more at large. Residents of the neighborhood, already shaken by the attack, grew increasingly fearful. The dogs, known for their territorial behavior, had been seen frequently around the area, showing aggression toward anyone they encountered. They were wild, untrained, and without the necessary discipline to live safely within a human community. In total, the 6 dogs were reported to have been roaming across an area of about 500 square blocks, causing havoc as they moved through yards, alleyways, and streets. For months before the attack, neighbors had reported the pit bulls to animal control, but their warnings had gone unheeded. It wasn't until Dennis's death that authorities took action, but by then it was too late. The damage had been done, and the neighborhood would never be the same. The presence of the remaining 3 dogs, still unaccounted for, kept the residents on edge, afraid to walk the streets they once called home. Melvina, consumed by grief, suspected the dogs had been neglected or intentionally trained to be aggressive, perhaps fed raw meat to fuel their savage behavior. Without knowing the owner, the true cause of the attack remained a mystery. While pit bulls are often unfairly stigmatized, their aggression is usually the result of mistreatment. In this case, negligence had turned them into predators, roaming unchecked and becoming a deadly force in the Penrose neighborhood. Dennis Moore's tragic death underscored the dangers of failing to properly care for animals. It left a lasting mark on the community and raised an unsettling question. Are certain breeds, like pit bulls, simply too risky as household pets? Thank you for joining us as we uncovered the chilling reality of pets turning deadly. These stories remind us that even the most trusted companions can bring devastating consequences. But don't leave just yet. There's one more tale to tell. It's the story of Islam Shaheen, a skilled lion tamer whose years of experience couldn't protect him from the wild instincts of the creatures he worked with. During a live performance, one unpredictable moment turned fatal with unimaginable consequences. What happened that night will stay with you long after. Click to watch the full story.